Hey there YouTube, Baylor here with another cozy video for you. Today I want to talk about the cards of Watcher. I'll be ranking all of her cards, starter cards included, from a scale of D to S, or S to D I guess if you prefer, with a ranking based on how often or how not often I find myself taking them. Feel free to let me know in the comments below what your favorite Watcher card is, and whether you agree or disagree with any of my rankings. Without further ado, let's start talking about the commons of Watcher, starting with her block cards, with Evaluate first up on the list. Evaluate is a relatively weak block card that adds a insight into your draw pile. That insight draws 2 cards, and so Evaluate ends up being draw neutral. I find that this is relatively weak on its own, but notably has a good upgrade for +4. So if you can get a free upgrade, Evaluate becomes pretty good. It's also pretty good with dexterity, but overall a little bit behind the curve. And Watcher definitely has better blocks and better block commons available to her. How about Protect? Retain, gain 12 block. It's okay. Protect is okay, and I think I'd put it in C or B tier overall. The retain effect of Protect is definitely handy, particularly on a block card. Having that block in your hand when you want it is going to be a really useful thing. But overall, Protect ends up relatively expensive for what it does. Can pair nicely with discount things like Establishment, but overall, a little bit behind the curve. I think I'm also going to put that in C tier. Whoa, cursor jumped on me there. I'm going to put that in C tier with the other block card. How about Prostrate? Prostrate is a 0-cost block, which I think is quite valuable on Watcher. Watcher can gain dexterity from a number of sources that make the small amount of block that this card provides into a much greater value. It also generates Mantra, which gets you towards Divinity Stance, and doing so on a 0-cost card is quite valuable because it means that Prostrate, if you can get enough Mantra, becomes an energy generator. I think it therefore becomes a quite useful addition to the deck, not only early, because you'll want a little bit more block density, especially if you're removing defends on Watcher, but can also be an important part of your late game energy engine. That said, one Prostrate on its own is not really enough to do anything, and that prevents Prostrate from getting into a really high tier, but I like it as an entry point into Mantra overall. Third Eye. Third Eye is a very, very notable card for me, in that Third Eye is one of the most powerful scry cards that this character has, letting you look at the top 3 or upgraded top 5 cards of your draw pile and discard any of them. It's basically like looking at an entire turn ahead of time, and paired with pretty substantial block too. There's almost no build on Watcher that doesn't appreciate being able to take a look at the draw pile in this fashion, and so I rate Third Eye very, very highly, especially if there's an upgrade involved. I think regular Third Eye is A tier for me, and Third Eye Plus is S tier. I don't know where I would drop the card overall. I think I'm actually just going to put the card in S tier because that's how I feel about it as a general rule, and I really do want it to be distinguished from some of the other cards in the character. I almost always take Third Eye if I see it in Act 1, and I very, very, very highly rate the upgrade on it. Being able to look at 2 more cards it's like adding a draw 2 effect, almost. There's very few things in Spire that can get that kind of value from an upgrade. And you get extra block, it's ridiculous. Totally ridiculous. How about a Halt? Halt I really like. Halt is extremely efficient at block if you're in Wrath stance, giving you 10 block in Wrath, and a lot more than that upgraded. It also benefits twice from dexterity. So if you have 1 point of dex, that equates to 2 more points of block in Wrath. The problem with Halt is that I sometimes have difficulty in getting it into my hand alongside the other things that you need. That said, Halt can be a really, really cool defensive core for Watcher. I'm going to put it in B tier overall. I think it's a very powerful card. It's a little bit niche, though. It's most effective when you can block with Halt in Wrath and then leave Wrath at the end of your turn. But if you can get enough dexterity or enough copies of upgraded Halt, you can simply block while in Wrath stance and never even leave. How about Empty Body? I think Empty Body is an okay card. Don't think it's quite down in C tier. I like it in B. Stance changing in general is a very, very powerful thing for the Watcher to do. Simply leaving your stance is nice and handy. Allows you to get extra energy for Calm, or allows you to avoid taking double damage from Wrath. And I think Watcher has better stance control cards. We'll be talking about those shortly. But that said, Empty Body overall ranks pretty highly for me. I think it's decent. How about Empty Fist? Empty Fist is deal 9 damage, exit your stance. Empty Fist, I think, is very notable for having an incredibly good upgrade. I would probably put regular Empty Fist in B tier, and then Empty Fist Plus in A tier. Empty Fist Plus doing a whole 14 damage, 5 more than regular Empty Fist, which if you're in Wrath is 28, more than enough to just clobber opponents in Act 1. Taking an Empty Fist as your first card and upgrading it is a very good way to start your run. Crush Joints. I think also a very, very good card. One of the only sources of Vulnerable for Watcher, and it's a relatively convenient one at that. You simply have to have played a skill as your previous card, which is not exactly free to do, but it's easier than meeting the condition of Indignation. Vulnerable in general is very, very powerful on Watcher because it's a multiplicative scaling for your attack damage. Vulnerable and Wrath combined is triple damage versus just the double damage of Wrath, or the 1.5 times damage of Vulnerable on its own. They combine with one another to make each other stronger. And so Vulnerable as a whole is very, very good for Watcher. Sash Whip performs a very, very similar function. It's weak if you have applied an attack previously. Watcher also has very few sources of weak, and I think weak is an excellent tool for block in the late game, but it's a little bit less valuable because Watcher, I think, gets more use out of her Vulnerable than she does out of Weaken. Not a whole lot more use, but a little bit more use. For that reason, I think I'll put Sash Whip just one tier lower. Alright, now we're on to the attacks, the common attacks. Follow-up can be free. You know, discounts in energy, or refunds, excuse me, in energy if you've previously played an attack. That makes it a effectively 0 cost, deal 7, or upgraded deal 11. A pretty solid overall attack card. Something I would probably rank in the B tier pretty happily. It's great. It doesn't do enormous things, but it's good. Cut Through Fate, meanwhile, I think is a step above. Cut Through Fate is damage and scry and draw. It's one of the more powerful manipulation tools for the Watcher. I think overall Cut Through Fate ends up ranked in A tier for me. It's good. It's not quite as much scry as Third Eye, but the draw one is a very useful thing. What really is kind of the selling point of Cut Through Fate is that you get to look at 2 cards and immediately draw either of them if you want to, or you can discard them both and draw a third mystery card. Cut Through Fate is particularly good if you're spamming attacks for any reason. For example, if you have Talk to the Hand, or if you've got the Golden Eye Relic for additional scry, it gets even better, in which case I'd rank it up in S tier with Third Eye. But I think overall, probably hits an A for me. I'm not quite as excited about Cut Through Fate as I am Third Eyes most of the time. How about Flying Sleeves? I think Flying Sleeves ends up a little underrated overall. It is a perfectly fine attack. Does only 8 damage by default, but you know, that's true of Crush Joints and Sash Whip too, with the added keyword Retain, so you have it in your hand whenever you need it. I think I think Flying Sleeves particularly needs an upgrade, making it 6 damage 2 times in order for it to feel really impactful. Overall, it's definitely one of the less useful Watcher attacks. I think I'll put it down in C tier. It's totally usable, and it's a perfectly fine first pick, but you'll often find that it lacks oomph compared to some of your other options. Speaking of cards with oomph, Bowling Bash is a card that's got some oomph to it. I really like this card. 7 damage for each enemy in combat. I actually had a Watcher run quite recently where an early Bowling Bash really made the whole thing feel so much more comfortable. Bowling Bash, you can kind of think of this like an area of effect damage card, but it does all of the damage to one target. You know, cards like Cleave or Conclude or Consecrate, they hit all enemies, so they deal their base damage times the number of enemies, but it's distributed equally amongst all the enemies. Whereas Bowling Bash does the exact same total damage, but it's all to one target, allowing you to instantly clobber one of the 3 sentries, one of the 3 slavers. You can use this card to donk Gremlin Leader or Reptomancer while their minions are on the field. It's really good against the Collector and the Bronze Automaton, just to name a few situations. It does fall off a little bit in the late game, but I think Bowling Bash is an excellent early to mid-game card. I'm going to put it up in, I genuinely think, A tier here overall. It just hits really, really hard, especially with an upgrade, and especially with any amount of strength. Now, in some fights, you'll find that it doesn't really do a whole lot. It's just kind of a strength plus in any single target fight. In the fights that it hits multiple times, you'll be very glad you had it. Flurry of Blows. This is an interesting one. Flurry of Blows is a free card that returns to your hand when you change stances. And on the surface, Flurry of Blows seems like really, really good value. You can play it 2 or 3 or 4 times on one turn. all at 0 cost. If you can scale it with strength or dexterity, it becomes fantastic. And it just gets back into your hand a lot. I think when Flurry of Blows is very good is when you have Scry, so that you can put it into your discard pile. That way it can return to your hand when you change stances. And it's better if you're incentivized for attack spam. For example, you've got a ninja relic of some kind, kunai, shuriken, ornamental fan, what have you. But in my practice, I've found that Flurry of Blows can be a bit of a dead weight at times. Playing lots and lots of cards is something that gets penalized by some enemies of the Spire, notably the Time Eater of Act 3, and if you're going for the Heart in Act 4, then taking damage every time you play a card can also really punish Flurry of Blows. The other problem I tend to have with Flurry of Blows is that of hand size. You have to have a spot in your hand in order for Flurry of Blows to return to your hand. And sometimes Watcher is drawing enough cards that means Flurry of Blows ends up inaccessible. This is particularly true when you've got Rushdown drawing cards as you enter Wrath, because you draw too many cards at the same time to use. But can also be the case with things like the Runic Pyramid filling up your hand, or just having lots of retain cards in general. For that reason, I'm not as happy to see Flurry of Blows these days as I once was, and overall I rate it relatively low. I think I'm going to put it in C tier. It's definitely usable, and I actively encourage you to take it with supporting relics, but just on its own, I'm not sold on Flurry of Blows. That's mostly true of Consecrate as well, although I'm going to put Consecrate 1 tier higher for its natural area of effect damage. Consecrate gets really, really good if you can strength scale it, but kind of fails to hit hard enough on its own. Just Lucky falls into a very, very similar category as those others. This is a 0 cost attack that just kind of does a bunch of stuff. This card is really all about scaling it with relics or effects of some kind. You need the Just Lucky card to trigger some sort of activated effect, whether it be a relic or increasing its numbers with strength and dexterity, or a power like Nirvana that kicks in when this card is played. The card on its own does relatively little, but its whole purpose is to allow you to piggyback stuff. I think it's an okay card, and I'll put it in B tier. I just very, 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 very highly value Scry, so I think that Just Lucky becomes a pretty reasonable inclusion on the merit of its Scry 1 alone. Particularly if you upgrade it, you get to Scry 1 more, as well as 1 more damage and 1 more block, which ain't too bad. It's not often worth upgrading, but if you get it upgraded for free, it's pretty good. And yes, very good with GoldenEye. 100% agree with that. How about the retain stance changes? I think these tend to be some of the less impactful cards for Watcher. Simply having retain as a keyword often isn't enough for this character, especially with so many ways to draw cards. Having too many things with retain can really be a problem for you. That said, Tranquility does have a notable niche in that the upgraded version of this card is a 0 cost calm entry, so essentially a 0 cost gain to energy, which can be a nice part of an engine for energy. But overall, I don't rank Tranquility very highly. I think down in C tier overall. Crescendo, meanwhile, I value a little bit higher. Having Wrath on retain is nice because you can trust that it'll always be in your hand when you need it. That way you can finish a fight with a good damage draw, or if you don't draw your damage cards, you can hold on to the Crescendo for 1 more turn until you're ready to do your Wrath kill. Both are nice just to have a little bit more control over when your stance cards arrive. But my personal preference, generally speaking, is to achieve this effect by the use of Scry cards. Again, you'll note a pretty high ranking for Scry overall here, compared to Retain. And I think that's a general theme on the Watcher, is that Scry obviates Retain to some degree. Alright, lastly but not leastly for the common cards, pressure points. Apply 8 mark, all enemies lose HP equal to their mark. How does one adequately express their feelings towards pressure points? This card is fun, if it works. Most of the time, pressure points doesn't work. But when pressure points is good, it's when you have multiple copies of pressure points. I don't know that I can truly adequately express how I feel about pressure points, other than to do the following, I think. That's pretty much how I feel. Alright, now let's talk about the uncommon cards of the Watcher. There are many. They are quite varied in their usefulness. And first up is the 2-cost power Fasting. Fasting gives you enormous strength and dexterity, 3 of each, but costs you, in addition to the 2 energy you paid for it, 1 energy each turn. Fasting can be very, very powerful under the right circumstances. I think fasting is incredible if you can negate that energy cost per turn. You can do it with Artifact, or you can do it with orange pellets to remove those, the debuff. The other thing that makes fasting work really well is having a low-cost deck. Fasting makes all of the zero-cost cards on the Watcher so much better. Fasting dramatically improves Flurry of Blows, it makes Consecrate and Just Lucky so much better, it makes Halt and Prostrate so much better. That said, the immediate cost and ongoing cost of fasting is pretty steep, so it can be a little bit difficult to put into play. Overall, I think it is one of the best ways to scale a Watcher deck into the late game of Spire. To tackle endgame bosses, adding 4 points of strength and dex goes a really, really long way. Also, as noted, Deviform, I think another great way to generate the energy required for a fasting. If you can get all that setup required, then this card becomes an excellent source of power for your run, but it is a little bit convoluted, which makes it a not always take for me. It does need support. That leads to a B tier rating for me overall. How about Fear No Evil? Fear No Evil is extremely powerful. I'm going to, generally speaking, highly rate any card that is a 1-cost calm entry, except You Tranquility, because these can be reusable energy generators when combined with stance exits or stance entries. Fear No Evil is particularly notable for not requiring an upgrade of the calm entry sources. And it's got a nice layer of conditionality to it. It only works if there's an enemy attacking you, which is usually when you want to enter calm anyway. Because, you don't want to end your turn in wrath if somebody's attacking you. So overall, I rate Fear No Evil extremely highly. I also have a pretty high opinion of Carve Reality. Carve Reality is essentially a strike. It's 1-cost deal 6, but then it adds a 1-cost deal 12, a retaining smite into your hand. That smite can be saved for a later turn, or it can be used immediately. Makes Carve Reality a really flexible card. You can look at it as 2 costs to deal 18, which is okay. Or you can look at it as a setup for your Wrath turn. I think probably somewhere between A and B overall. Probably give it a B tier rating. It's not the best of the attack cards, but it's definitely a great early game pickup. How about Weave? Weave I tend to like higher than, a little bit more than Flurry of Blows. Weave returns rather than when you stance change, it returns when you scry. And what I've found with Weave is that not only does scrying naturally combo with this card, because you can just look at it, discard it with the scry, and then it immediately returns to your hand, but also Weave tends to have fewer situations where its effect is wasted compared to Flurry of Blows. You're generally not drawing cards at the same time as you're scrying, unless you're using Cut Through Fate or something, compared to Rushdown strategies with Flurry of Blows, where you can end up wasting the draw quite easily. That said, in order for Weave to be useful, I think you need at least 2 or 3 scry cards. Since scry cards are pretty easy to get your hands on, most of them are in the common tier, that often, and I rank them pretty highly, that ends up meaning that I take quite a few Weaves. Still, just like Flurry of Blows, you do need some kind of support for it, either strength or a relic that activates when you play attacks, or something like that. If you're just playing it for 4 damage, it's not going to be good enough on its own. Wraith of Flame makes our next attack deal 5 or upgraded 8 additional damage. Wraith of Flame is pretty cool. Something that you might not know about this card is that the effect lasts for more than 1 turn, and the effect can stack with itself. So you can play multiple copies of Wraith of Flame, or even the same copy multiple times, to repeatedly power up 1 big attack. That bonus damage will apply to any number of strikes from the next attack, so comboed with a 3 or 4, or looking at upgraded Ragnarok times 6 attack means this additional damage will apply that many times. And it's also multiplied by your stance, whether it be Wrath or Divinity, and as well multiplied by Vulnerable. So any or all of these things will dramatically increase the damage done by Wraith of Flame. That said, Wraith of Flame ends up being a little bit draw order reliant. You have to get it in play before the card you're trying to multiply. And if you can't get into the correct stance, you might end up losing damage on it. That makes it a little convoluted, but I think pretty useful overall. I don't think I like putting Wreath of Flame in C tier. So probably overall a B tier rating here. Clunky. Yeah, I think clunky is a good description. I do really like it with Tantrum. I do really like it with Ragnarok, but it's oftentimes easier to get permanent strength than it is to make use of Wreath of Flame. Speaking of clunky, Worship is also here. Clunky is a 2-cost gain 5 mantra card, very notable for being more mantra than any other Watcher card. But a problem becomes immediate pretty quickly if you do the basic math. Divinity gives you 3 energy when you enter it. Worship gets you halfway to Divinity for 2 costs, so play 2 Worships for 4 energy, get 3 energy back. It's not a very good deal compared to some of the other mantra cards. A lot, if you're using Divinity in your deck, you really do want to be able to make use of the additional energy that Divinity is generating, and Worship kind of fails to get there. That said, it does upgrade to Retain, which can make it really useful, and it's also a very powerful card if you can duplicate it, because duplicating Worship by any means becomes instantaneous Divinity. Therefore, very good with Omniscience, very good with Duplication Potion. It's also pretty dang good with Snekawai. Food for thought there. Wave of the Hand. Wave of the Hand applies weak whenever you gain block to all enemies. And that can happen as many times as you want during your turn. Wave of the Hand is definitely the best source of weak on the Watcher. It's not something that I always end up taking because it is a little clunky if you're just starting out on 3 energy, but where Wave of the Hand gets absolutely ridiculous is if you combine it with any source of multi-blocking. Talk to the Hand per strike, Mental Fortress for block per stance change, any kind of relic that generates block, whether it be Orichalcum or Thread and Needle or Cloak Clasp. Even the Boat Relics. Actually, no, the Boat Relics don't help because they're start of turn. Excuse me, not the Boat Relics. But any kind of relic that blocks it at your end of turn, and there are quite a few, all make Wave of the Hand absolutely spectacular. If you can block 2 or 3 times after playing it, it becomes this card that provides weak for an entire fight, and very notably, because of the manner in which it is applied, it shreds through enemy artifact stacks. So a single Wave of the Hand can not only weaken Donu and Deka forever, but it can take all of their artifact layers off at the same time. No other card can do that. It's only because you need some kind of guarantee for block that Wave of the Hand doesn't end up in S tier for me. And I don't think it's a very good card in Act 1. Wheel Kick. Deal 15, draw 2. I think Wheel Kick's a very fantastic attack. I'm going to put that up in A tier. It's really good damage, particularly upgraded, becomes deal 20, and an unconditional draw 2 is really, really valuable. Sure, it's expensive. You do have to find the energy to pay for it, but I assure you it's a 2-cost card well worth paying for. And a very good early pick. Particularly in Wrath, upgraded Wheel Kick does 40 damage, which is enough to clobber many, many foes in a singular blow. Foreign Influence. I think this card is a little bit underrated overall. Foreign Influence is a 0-cost card that generates 1 of 3 attacks from any color. That can be Watcher cards, Ironclad cards, Silent cards, Defect cards, or it can be colorless cards even, including Hand of Greed. So you get cards from anywhere, and you get to choose 1 of 3 to add to your hand for the turn. That in and of itself is kind of whatever, but the upgraded version makes the card cost 0, and that can mean getting a 2 or 3 or even 5-cost card for free during your turn, and that's a huge energy boon. I might even put Foreign Influence Plus in A tier, but I think regular Foreign Influence will be in B tier. I suppose if I'm rating Third Eye S tier for its upgraded form, I should put Foreign Influence in A for its upgraded form. I don't take this card all that often, though, because I don't often have an upgrade to give to it. It really does need the upgrade. Actually, I think that's a good justification for 1 tier lower. Third Eye is good even without an upgrade, and becomes exceptional with an upgrade, whereas Foreign Influence is mediocre without an upgrade, and becomes very good with an upgrade. I think that'll land it in B tier for me. But make no mistake, Foreign Influence with an upgrade is fantastic. It gets even better if you have a dead branch or can piggyback off of it in some way by upgrading the card with Master Reality, or maybe you have a letter opener or something. How about Foresight? Foresight is scry at the start of your turn. I used to be a big Foresight fan, and I still am a very big fan of scry in general. I've fallen behind a little bit on Foresight lately. I think it's going to drop down one tier to B tier for me, but is definitely worth picking up and playing. One of my favorite powers on Watcher. Foresight becomes exceptional when you're able to duplicate it. I think it's a good omniscience target. You could scry 6 or even 8 each turn. Foresight becomes a really powerful way to avoid drawing status cards in the first place. Particularly with a Bottled Tornado, I think Foresight can be very good, allowing you to guaranteed scry every single turn, starting from turn 2. This is particularly useful against the endgame battles in Act 4. The Spear and Shield, Foresight allows you to discard the burns before you draw them, and against Heart, it allows you to discard the Void before you draw it. And both of these are very, very useful effects. That said, it is a little bit slow. Foresight is very notably a card that doesn't do anything the turn you play it, and that's always a hard sell, although less so on Watcher. How about Indignation? I think Indignation is one of the less good Wrath sources, but still pretty good overall. Indignation says, if you're in Wrath, apply 3 Vuln to all enemies, otherwise it puts you in Wrath. It's definitely usable, and the vulnerable that it applies can be really good, but because you don't often have 2 Wrath sources in your hand, at least in my experience, it's pretty difficult to get the vulnerable out of it. The upgrade only makes the vulnerable aspect better, not the simply entering the Wrath stance portion of it. So if you're using Indignation to enter Wrath, the upgrade won't help you at all. That's another reason I don't think so highly of Indignation. Comparatively, Inner Peace I have a really high opinion of these days. It's one of those one-cost commentary cards. I think all of those are going to end up in A tier, except you, Tranquility. And it's also a pretty useful draw source. It's draw 3 or upgraded draw 4 if you're in Com, which is one of the best draw sources on the character. How about Empty Mind? Empty Mind is also a draw source on the character, combined with a stance exit, and I think the two of them combined are really good, particularly if you're leaving Com source. Empty Mind is kind of like a mini offering. You draw 2 or upgraded 3 cards, and you gain energy at the same time, which is super nice. It's also just really nice to have as stance control in general, so I'm going to rank Empty Mind quite highly, as it's part of the overall consistency package that Watcher really appreciates. Let's talk about Collect. Collect puts a Miracle Plus into your hand at the beginning of your next X turns. So you spend energy immediately to gain essentially twice that energy dispensed gradually over the next few turns. Collect is a very strange card, and I think Collect is probably, I dare say, the worst energy generating card on the Watcher. And Watcher has quite a few ways to generate energy, so that's quite a statement about Collect. The real stinker for me on this one is that as an X-cost card, you are theoretically incentivized to spend lots of energy on this card, right? That's the whole point, is that you can flexibly spend a lot of energy if you need to, or it can be an energy sink for you. But the reward for doing so is simply more energy, and worst of all, the more energy you spend on Collect, the longer it takes for the payoff to occur, because you have to wait more and more turns for the miracles to arrive. That makes Collect pretty dang awkward. Now, where it can be really good is, of course, with Dead Branch, because each of these miracles will exhaust and generate a new card. And it can also be useful if it comes upgraded, or if you have the Chemical X Relic. And then you can play it for zeros and get a Miracle Plus still. That said, you're still exchanging 1 or more card draws. Or, well, not 1 or more. You're exchanging 1 card draw for these miracles, however much energy you spent, in addition to the turns waited. It's a pretty hard sell, like I said. If you get it upgraded for free, I think it's okay. But otherwise, no. Avoid. Avoid. How about Conclude? Conclude's a card I've had mixed opinions of. At its core, Conclude is a 1-cost deal 12 to all enemies. That's pretty dang potent, but ending your turn means that you can't leave your stance afterwards if you were in Wrath. which is particularly problematic for an attack like this. And it also means that Conclude competes with other cards that say end your turn, some of which you might want to play instead. Also makes Conclude incompatible with the card's signature move, as well as making it difficult to do things like set up a Lesson Learn. Ultimately, Conclude is really, really good value for its energy cost, with a seriously inconvenient downside. I think overall that makes it B tier for me. It's an incredible early game pickup, particularly in the Act 1 or Act 2, but man, do I find it dead weight later in the game. That said, carrying one deadweight card around is often something Watcher can afford, particularly if you've been taking your third eyes. Windmill Strike. Windmill Strike's, I think, a card that ends up outclassed by Watcher. Generally speaking, Sands of Time is going to do a better job, but ultimately Windmill Strike is a 2-cost attack that gradually increases in damage over time. It's not useless, so I don't feel like I'm going to put it down in D tier with Collect right now. But it is definitely a card that's on the low scale of Watcher. What it does is let you slowly build up damage over time. And there's a few notable uses for this. I think it's good against the Slime Boss. I think it's good against Hexaghost. I think it's good against the Champ Boss. And I think it's good against the Elites of Act 1 in general. So if your first card reward has a Windmill Strike and no other damage cards in it, I suggest you pick up the Windmill Strike. Otherwise, no, basically. It's not useless, but it's outclassed. There are other cards that do the job better. Right off the top of my head, Battle Hymn does better, Sands of Time does better. Lykewater is also a card that gets outclassed. That's not to say Lykewater is useless by any means. I think it ends up probably in C tier, actually. It's a conditional block power. If you're in Calm at the end of your turn, gain 5 block, upgraded, gain 7 block. Compared to Metallicize on Ironclad, and it's a lot more block, but only if you can meet its condition. That said, it's not something to underestimate. Block powers, however they arrive, are one of the best ways to gear your Watcher up for the heart. So keep Lykewater in mind as an Act 4 answer or a late game boss answer in general, but note that you'll probably prefer a Mental Fortress. Lykewater also makes it really awkward to take empty cards like Empty Body, Empty Fist, or Empty Minds. And that's also a slight issue. If it was, if you're not in Wrath, gain 7 block, it'd be a lot more takeable. Another thing to note is that if you start your combats in Calm Stance via the Teardrop Relic, then Lykewater becomes way, way better, and I would rank it B or maybe even A tier if you have the Teardrop. Meditate. That's yet another one of the 1-cost Ender Calms, and I'm going to put them all in A tier, except you Tranquility. Meditate has the added benefit of putting 1 or upgraded 2 cards from your discard pile into your hand. It's kind of like a hologram, but it also generates you energy, and upgraded its 2 cards. The only downside is that it ends your turn, and that is a pretty big downside. If you could play the cards immediately, it'd be absolutely broken. But as it stands, it's a really nice way to set up your future turns for the Watcher. Use Meditate to get back your Wrath cards to set up a big damage turn. Use Meditate to guarantee a block for a critical attack turn, or whatever it is that you need, Meditate can achieve. Yeah, I would almost put it in S tier. If it weren't for the fact that it ended your turn, I think it would be up in S. Part of the problem with Meditate is ultimately that it does compete with some of the other Watcher cards, and does start to fall off a little bit with multiple copies. 2 copies of Meditate can be fine. Actually, they can fetch each other, and that can be really good. But any more than that is a bit limiting. Very nice with the Establishment, too, as noted. All right, how about Mental Fortress? Whenever you change stances, gain 4 block. I think of the block powers for Watcher, this is probably the best one. I don't know that means it's an S tier card. I don't think I take Mental Fortress every time I see it. But I'm almost always happy to see one, and it's almost always a great way to get your late game going. So I'm going to put it up in A tier here as a stellar way to block in the late game with Watcher. Upgraded Mental Fortress is 6 block, which is quite ridiculous considering how many times per turn Watcher can often manage to change stances. Compared to Nirvana, which is less block for a similar effect, giving us 3 or upgraded 4 block when you scry. It really feels like the numbers on Mental Fortress and Nirvana should be swapped with one another, to me. It's a little bit harder to scry than it is to change stances, I tend to find. And it's really just the lower number on Nirvana that that comparatively makes it a lower rank for me. If you're scrying many times per turn, like you've got lots of cut-through fates and just luckies, then consider it. But also consider that you might be better off with a fasting. Overall, just not often a big fan of Nirvana. It's totally usable, though, just like all the other cards in C tier. None of those cards in C tier are useless by any means. Perseverance. Where's Perseverance? Perseverance is a card that gains block when retained. It only starts at 5 block, though, just a basic defend. And only scales up by 2 per turn, which takes a long time to make it any real source of block. The upgraded version scales by 3 per turn and starts a little bit higher. But overall, I find that Perseverance just tends to have a little bit too low a value on its numbers for me to really like. And that puts it in, I think, the lowest tier for me. Perseverance is also a card that tends to be outclassed. I tend to think Protect does a better job on average or almost any other block solution. When Perseverance is best is when you can play it and then retain it back into your hand in the same turn. So comboing Perseverance with Meditate can be quite powerful. But overall, I think it tends to be just a little bit too weak. Not totally useless, though. Can be a nice defensive answer to Champ, letting you block the Execute over a very long period of time. I guess it's okay against Guardian, too. But I'm really struggling to think of fights where Perseverance is a particularly useful card, and in those fights, you'll note that Watcher has many other ways to deal with them. So I think that's part of why Perseverance ends up in D tier for me. It's not useless, but it's both outclassed and fills a role that isn't that useful for this character. How about Pray? Pray is one of the relatively few mantra cards this character has. Pray is 1 cost, giving you 3 or upgraded 4 mantra, and puts an insight into the draw pile, just like Evaluate does. And I think just like Evaluate, it's a relatively low-tier card. Similar problem to Worship, where the energy given to you by the Divinity stance is partially lost in paying for the Prey. And simply adding an insight to the draw pile is not often a useful thing. You have to play that card to draw more cards, and that can get punished later on. It's also only draw neutral instead of being an actual draw generator. Prey, like other cards that generate insights, gets a lot better if the insights are upgraded via Master Reality, and works a lot better with a Dead Branch. But overall, I'm not a huge fan of Prey. That said, I do like Prey paired alongside Prostrate. One of my favorite ways to get to 10 mantra is 2 upgraded Prostrates and 1 upgraded Prey. 3 plus 3 plus 4 equals 10, and then you're there for only 1 energy. That feels pretty good. Like most mantra cards, Prey really wants an upgrade. And, well, this character's pretty upgrade heavy. Reach Heaven. I think Reach Heaven is a very good damage card. A bit problematic, just like any card that shuffles a card into your draw pile, you're essentially paying the draw cost of this card 2 times. Reach Heaven offers relatively low damage up front, 10 upgraded 15. And then the card shuffled into the draw pile deals 20 damage for 0 cost. I really like Reach Heaven as a way to kind of accumulate damage that you can then deliver with your stance scaling pretty well. But there's often better ways to do it. I most frequently prefer Carve Reality instead. Carve Reality is a similar amount of damage for 1 less card draw and the same energy cost. Not quite similar, but 1 less card draw is a big deal. Particularly notable for Reach Heaven is that the Through Violence that's added to the draw pile gains 10 whole damage when upgraded with Master Reality. Rushdown. Draw 2 whenever you enter Wrath. Rushdown is one of the best powers on the Watcher. Wrath stance is relatively easy to come by, and the transition from Calm to Wrath can be an energy-generating effect for the Watcher. So adding card draw to an energy-generating effect is spectacular. Rushdown notably also has an upgrade to 0 cost. This is a power that I'm not 100% sure where to put. I think this could reasonably be something that you rank in S, simply because it's so broadly useful. This is partially because Watcher starts with a Wrath card, Interruption, and has access to many others. But it's not something that I take all that often. when I see it. There are many, many rushdowns I see that I don't take. So I'm a little conflicted here. This is very reasonably straddling the border between A and S. Notably, a Rushdown is not a card you want if you're doing mantra scaling sometimes. And I think mantra scaling can be very good. And if you're doing a Wrathless deck of any kind, and that's something that you can do on Watcher, although I don't always recommend it, and I certainly don't do it all that often, then Rushdown is also not useful. I think I'm going to put it in A here, rather than an S. Yeah, slightly fewer use cases. Rushdown's also a card that may not be useful in multiple copies. 2 Rushdowns is fine, but once you get more than 2, it's excessive. The same is not true of Third Eye, nor the other cards that I know I'm going to be putting in S tier. Is it better than Mental Fortress? Not always. Sometimes you really need the block from Mental Fortress, although the draw of Rushdown can absolutely be used to generate a lot of block, particularly if you've got Halt or something. Battle Hymn. Battle Hymn puts a smite into your hand at the start of each turn. I think Battle Hymn is a really, really good card in the early game, but starts to fall off a little bit in the later game. 1 smite per turn can result in Hand Clog. And also the Battle Hymn itself, yet another card that doesn't do anything on the turn you play it, which is a little bit problematic. Overall, I think it's a B tier card. Perfectly good damage generator, but something that needs to be paired with Front Load in order to deal with fights that demand damage on turn 1. And Battle Hymn can also have a bit of a problematic upgrade. Battle Hymn upgrades to Innate, always appearing in your hand on turn 1, and that can make it difficult to block on turn 1 or deal damage on turn 1 in fights where you need immediate output. Really like Battle Hymn in Watcher decks that have a Bag of Preparation or an Anchor, some kind of relic that helps them on turn 1. Also notably quite good with Dead Branch. Sanctity. Sanctity is block and sometimes draw. I think it's fine. The simple block effective Sanctity is not that desirable for the Watcher, but draw 2 is always nice. I think that puts Sanctity in B tier for me. It's quite good, and particularly if you're scaling with Dexterity, it's excellent. I really like Sanctity paired with Halt or Prostrate. Any kind of zero-cost skill can make it easier to meet the condition of this effect. But overall, it's not always something that you want or need. Sands of Time. This is the damage card, the main damage card that I think outclasses Windmill Strike. For 4 cost, it deals 20, upgraded 28. What makes Sands of Time better than Windmill Strike is that you can just pay more energy immediately to get the full damage of Sands of Time, whereas there's no way to make Windmill Strike do lots of damage on turn 1. You just can't do it. It's only going to do 7 damage. That means Sands of Time is a little bit more flexible. Note that you can combine Sands of Time with the Establishment power to discount it multiple times per turn. If you have Establishment in play, it goes from 4 to 2 and then to 0 over only 2 turns. How about Deceive Reality? Deceive Reality is block immediately, and it also adds a safety into your hand. If you combine the 2 cards, it's 2 cost for block 16, which is way better than Protect, and it has the retain value that the Protect has. I tend to think Deceive Reality, therefore, mostly outclasses Protect as a card, and it's one of the best defensive cards on Watcher. Because it's 2 cards in 1, you can gain double value out of Fasting, and it's also something that you can use to just make your draws really efficient overall. I very, very much like it. You can control how much you're using it to block on a given turn. It combos really well with Dead Branch. You can upgrade the safety with Master Reality or with similar cards. I really, really like this card overall. And I think it ends up just being one of the best and most efficient block sources for the Watcher. It's the big reason Protect's in C tier, like I said. How about Signature Move? Man, this is one of the cards I think that's hardest to rate. When it works, A or S tier, but most of the time down in C or D, because ultimately Signature Move has a condition that's really difficult to meet. Can only be played if you have no other attack cards in your hand. The fundamental problem with Signature Move, Watcher loves attack cards. Watcher has very good attack cards. Watcher wants to remove defends and not strikes. Signature Move wants you to remove your strike cards. Watcher loves to add Flurry of Blows and Wallops and Talk to the Hands and Tantrums and all that, and Signature Move doesn't want you to do any of that. So Signature Move at its core really clashes with the kinds of cards you're very heavily incentivized to take in your early game, and therefore makes it very difficult to take Signature Move in the first place. That said, if you can get it to work, it's incredible. Pairs very, very well with all of the cards that you don't usually take. I love Signature Move with Like Water. I love Signature Move with non-attack damage sources like Pressure Points or Alpha, Beta, Omega. Definitely consider it if you can reduce the number of attacks in your deck substantially. It's very good. Hey everyone. Did you know that you can now support me directly on YouTube by getting a channel membership? For as low as $5 a month, you'll get access to perks like custom badges and emojis to use in comments and discounts on the merch store, all while helping support me and this channel to do what I love every day. Just click the join button below to get started. Now back to the video. Simmering Fury. Simmering Fury is a bit interesting. Simmering Fury, again, has that quintessential problem of this card doesn't do anything the turn you play it, and that is a downside. Should always be considered a downside. If a card doesn't do anything immediately, that's a downside. So unfortunately, Simmering Fury does land there. That said, what it does is enter Wrath and draw 2, and that's a pretty useful effect. I think Wrath Stance in general is very, very good on Watcher. But I often don't take Simmering Fury, specifically because it's not instantaneous. That said, Simmering Fury is best when the non-instantaneousness of it is an advantage to you. It's a Wrath card that you can play on a turn you're being attacked, because you don't actually enter Wrath until the next turn. If you end your turn in Calm, then Simmering Fury ends up being draw more cards and gain more energy at the start of your next turn, and that's particularly useful. Overall, I think it's a really good card if you can adequately set up a turn for it, but it's definitely one that needs support. Combos very, very nicely with Meditate. Combos very, very nicely with Vault, which makes the effect go off instantly. And combos really, really nicely with Scry as well, since you can assure yourself that you're going to draw into a Wrath exit or something. How about Study? Study is a very, very strange card. For 2 cost, put an Insight into your draw pile every turn. That Insight is a 0 cost draw 2 per turn, draw 2 when played card. Study essentially therefore becomes a rather expensive card draw card. I'm going to put you in C tier, Study, because I do think you're a little awkward at times. The 2 cost is really hard to justify as well. The upgraded version of Study is only 1 cost, which is a little bit more reasonable. Study also becomes a lot better if, like all those other cards that put insights into the draw pile, if you have a Dead Branch, it's way better. And if you can get those insights upgraded, it's also way better. So not terrible with Master Reality, and not bad with Dead Branch, but also, as noted, another card that does nothing on the turn you play it. When Study is good is when you're able to utilize the draw effect to your advantage, and Study is notably card draw that you can choose when to play it, which is more useful than just card draw all the time. My favorite combo for Study is combo it with Tantrum. Tantrum puts itself in the draw pile, Study can then instantly get it back with an Insight, and so you can do something like play Tantrum, draw it again with Insight, play Tantrum, draw it again with Insight, over and over again. Kind of neat. Swivel. Swivel's another interesting block card. It blocks for 8 or upgraded 11, and makes your next attack free, which can be quite useful. Swivel combos best with the expensive attacks of Watcher, combo with Wheel Kick, combo with Wallop, combo with Ragnarok. But overall, it's a little awkward. Just like Wreath of Flame, Swivel is notable for stacking with itself and notable for lasting multiple turns. Do keep both of those in mind when considering it. My favorite use for Swivel is with a Snecko Eye, because it can guarantee that you can play an attack from your hand no matter what the Snecko Eye rolled, and that can be really, really convenient. Slight disadvantage with Snecko Eye, though. If you start your turn with the Swivel effect, you won't be able to know what cost your cards are. They'll all say 0 until you play one, at which point they will be who knows what. So you might not know that you're playing a free attack that you didn't want. And that is, I think, the one disadvantage Swivel has, is that if you play a 0 cost attack, like Flurry of Blows, it still uses the charge of Swivel. How about Talk to the Hand? Talk to the Hand is one of the best cards. for blocking, particularly if you're on a Heart 1 with Watcher. Talk to the Hand applies a permanent debuff to one foe, giving you 2 or upgraded 3 block every time you strike that foe with an attack. Watcher loves to attack spam, which is one of the reasons Talk to the Hand is so good. Now, where Talk to the Hand is problematic is in 2 situations. Situation number 1, fights with multiple enemies, because you can't always strike the same enemy, and so you might not be able to get in block then. And Talk to the Hand also is a debuff, so it gains blocked by artifact. It's also removed when enemies remove debuffs. So Champ will remove Talk to the Hand, Time Eater will remove Talk to the Hand, Awakened One will remove Talk to the Hand. What that means is that although Talk to the Hand is an exceptional source of block, you can't have it be your only source of block, because certain fights in the game, notably Time Eater, Awakened One, Spire, Spear, and Shield, and Donu and Deka, will kill you for trying to block with just Talk to the Hand. It's an excellent, excellent card for solving hearts, but it doesn't do an adequate job in other fights, and for that reason, I don't think I put it in S tier. It also requires you to be able to strike multiple times, usually, either with zero-cost attacks or with attack spam in general, and if you're playing relatively few hard-hitting attacks, then the Talk to the Hand may not be all that good. That said, it pairs extremely well with Tantrum. I really like it also with Sash Whip, with Flurry of Blows, with Weave, and with various other things. A very, very great card overall. Tantrum! Tantrum hits multiple times, enters Wrath, and puts itself into the draw pile. It's definitely the best Wrath card that there is. Putting itself into the draw pile is absolutely ridiculous because it means with a Tantrum upgrade, you can benefit from that upgrade multiple times by drawing the card multiple times. Sometimes it's a bad thing that it puts itself into the draw pile, though. You don't always want to draw it again. And without a little bit of support, Tantrum ultimately doesn't deal that much damage. You really need to add strength to make Tantrum exceptional. That said, if you do add strength, it's one of the best. Having a hard time. I think this could also reasonably be in either S or A tier. For your personal list, I think it would be reasonable if you wanted to put both of these in S tier or even all 3 of these in S tier. Notably, very, very good together, but I think they're all up in A tier for me personally, rather than in S. They're almost always takes, they're almost always very good, but there are other cards that can serve the same role, and you don't always need them. So that's how I feel. Tantrum is very, very good. No doubt about that. I think that's also true of Wallop. Wallop is also very, very good. Wallop is an attack card that gives you block equal to the damage dealt. Not very efficient damage, but Wallop can be ridiculous amounts of block pretty easily because Watcher can multiply it with Wrath, with Divinity, with Vulnerable, with Pen Nib, with Strength. Anything that you have that can make Wallop do more damage will make it exceptional, and it starts out pretty good on its own. Wallop is also not in S tier, because Wallop does have disadvantages. It's 2 cost, which is expensive, and it is reduced in effectiveness if you're weakened or if the enemy has block. Not all that often that enemies have block, but they do shut down Wallop when they do, and that is a problem for you. How about Devaform? We're into the rares now. That's all the uncommons ranked. Just a few more to go here. Devaform gives you energy every turn, more and more and more. Unfortunately, Devaform is what we call a very slow card. Devaform costs 3 and then gives you energy back. 1 energy the turn after, 2 energy 2 turns later, 3 energy 3 turns later. That means you won't get the energy that you invested into your Devaform until 3 turns after you play it. That's pretty slow. That said, where Devaform is good is when it lets you play lots and lots and lots more cards over the course of a fight. If you have tons and tons of card draw, particularly if you have Snecko Eye, Devaform can be really, really good. It's also potentially a very good target for Omniscience, allowing you to get multiple Devaforms in play very quickly. And it pairs nicely with the Fasting Power to allow you to overcome the minus energy per turn of that. That said, Devaform, I think, is a little outclassed as an energy generator on the Watcher. There are frequently better ways to get there, either by stance dancing out of Calm Stance or by generating enough mantra. So I tend to prefer those options instead. Spirit Shield, a very powerful 2-cost block. Spirit Shield scales with the number of cards in hand. And Watcher, more than any other character, can easily get lots of cards in hand via Retain and via card draw. I don't think it ends up in A tier overall. I think it's pretty good block, but there's many ways to get block with Watcher. It's good, but not exceptional. An overall B tier ranking from me. Definitely one of the more usable rares. Devotion also probably ending up in B tier here. Devotion says mantra gain per turn. What I really like about Devotion is its per turn effect can be very useful as an energy generator, particularly in boss combats, because you pay for it one time, but it generates energy every single turn. And combined with the damage multiplication of Divinity is really powerful. It's also notable for being the only mantra card that can reasonably get you into Divinity on its own, with the upgraded version giving you Divinity 4 turns after playing it, which is still a little slow. Alright, just a few more. Deus Ex Machina I also quite like. Generates 2 miracles when drawn, or 3 upgraded. This is my favorite thing ever with Dead Branch. And I think with Dead Branch, it's A or even S tier, but overall, it's okay. You're essentially trading 1 draw for 2 energy, guaranteed. It's also 2 extra cards in hand, which can be useful for some effects. Energy in the form of miracles is particularly useful because miracles can be upgraded, miracles can activate certain relics. Some of my favorite uses for Deus Ex Machina is just having 1 big energy-heavy turn, allowing you to do something like put Deviform in play or just get a bunch of powers set up. That said, trading 1 draw is an expensive thing, and you might not always be able to use the miracles on the turn you draw them, which can make Deus Ex a little awkward. That makes it a B tier for me. It's definitely takeable and one of the better energy sources for Watcher, but not amazing overall. Blasphemy. Blasphemy is a very good card, although it's a very dangerous card. Blasphemy enters Divinity instantly for the low price of literally dying. In order for Blasphemy to be good, you either need to end the fight on the turn you play it, and with the upgrade on Blasphemy, that's nice and easy. It upgrades to Retain, so you can keep it in your hand until you draw a set of cards that will kill your foes, then use the Divinity and kill your foes. Oftentimes that's the turn you draw it, but if it's not, that's where the upgrade comes in. You can also survive it by being intangible or having a second life with something, so I think Blasphemy ends up being pretty good overall. Just make sure you triple check your math before you commit to the Blasphemy. How about Conjure Blade? Having had a couple runs recently that have involved Conjure Blade, I've improved my opinion of it a little bit. It's not a D tier card. Might not even be C tier, but it is a little awkward. Conjure Blade is an X cost that requires you to sink energy into it, creating a reusable, powerful sword, hitting 1 time per energy that you invested. A decently invested Conjure Blade can easily be the strongest attack in Watcher's card pool, but the problem with this card is that you have to draw it, pay a lot of energy for it, and then draw and play another card in order to get any effect out of this, and that is a tough sell. That said, where Conjure Blade is best is when combined with immediate energy gain. I like it with Deus Ex Machina or with the Holy Water boss relic so that you can get a lot of energy instantaneously to play a powerful Conjure Blade on turn 1 or turn 2. I do not like it with Deviform, although you might think that the increasing energy per turn of Deviform would make for a powerful Conjure Blade. You're talking about playing Deviform, waiting several turns, playing Conjure Blade, waiting several turns, drawing Expunger. That's not going to work. It's just too long. The Summon Blade costs 1 energy and it does not exhaust. So the idea behind an effective Conjure Blade deck is that you can draw and reuse the Expunger Sword multiple times. And to that end, I think a 2 or 3 or 4 energy Conjure Blade is often sufficient. It's a surprisingly good answer to bosses in particular. I really like it in conjunction with Talk to the Hand. I really like it in conjunction with... yeah, that's about it, actually. I like it in conjunction with Talk to the Hand. It's got use, and I don't think it's the worst X-Cost card on Watcher. Those are my thoughts there. How about Establishment? Establishment makes anything that's retained cheaper. It's a pretty reasonable energy cheat for this character, although as noted, Watcher has a lot of other energy cheats. It's also a card with an innate upgrade, putting it into your opening hand. I'm not sure if I would put Establishment in B or C tier. I think I've seen enough good uses of Establishment to say that it's a B tier overall. Really good in conjunction with lots of retaining cards, protects, smites, safeties, and my favorite use is combine Establishment with Meditate to make any card in your discard pile permanently cheaper. Unfortunately, Establishment doesn't work with the boss relic Runic Pyramid, but it will work with cards that say Retain from other characters, notably Well-Laid Plans on Silent and Equilibrium on the Defect. So if you have a Prismatic Shard run that sees both of those things, they will work together. Poor Master Reality. Master Reality is a 1-cost power that says, anytime you create a card this combat, upgrade it. Fundamentally, the problem with Master Reality is that you have to draw and play Master Reality, then draw and play a card that creates a card, then draw and play the created card. And that's too many steps of separation, I think, for Master Reality to end up in anything other than a low tier. Now, when Master Reality is good is when you're directly generating cards into your hand, I think, because that takes out one of those 3 steps. So I particularly like it with generated smites and safeties, Carve Reality, Battle Hymn, and Deceive Reality. And when Master Reality is best is with, of course, the relic Dead Branch. Dead Branch generates a random card directly into your hand whenever you exhaust a card. If you have Master Reality, those cards will be upgraded, and that combo is very strong. It also notably works with Nilri's Codex or any other relic or potion source of card generation. Master Reality will upgrade your attack potion, your power potion, your skill potion, and Master Reality will upgrade things from Nilri's Codex, as noted. One of the best cards you can upgrade is the Expunger from Conjure Blade, which goes from 9 damage per hit to 15 damage per hit. It's a really crazy combo, but as noted, really difficult to get in play. You have to draw and play Master Reality, then play Conjure Blade, then play the Expunger. You could have just won the fight already by then. Oh yes, and as noted, Foreign Influence, which I think is one of the better sources because it puts that card directly into your hand. Vault. All right, we gotta fill out the S tier because Vault is going there. Vault gives you a whole extra turn. Vault is crazy, 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 crazy strong. It might not seem like it at first because paying 3 for, it basically takes your entire turn. But because you get a whole turn back, you can think of Vault as a 0-cost card. Pay 3 energy, get 3 energy back instantly. And the more start of turn effects you have, the better Vault becomes. Every relic that gives you energy per turn, every relic that gives you block per turn, every relic that does damage per turn, every relic that does anything, any power that does anything. Playing Vault will cause all of your retain cards to stay in your hand. Playing Vault will cause Windmill Strike and Perseverance to increase their numbers. Playing Vault will cause Sands of Time to decrease. Playing Vault will cause Establishment to make all cards that retain in your hand cheaper. Playing Vault will cause Devotion to give you additional mantra. The list goes on and on and on, and I guarantee you're going to have one or more of these things on any given Watcher run. That's part of what makes Vault so fantastic. It's also basically a get-out-of-jail-free card. Didn't draw any block? Well, play Vault, draw a whole new hand, and everything is fine. It's crazy, crazy good overall. Kind of like a Calculated Gamble, but if Calculated Gamble gave you all your energy back when you played it. Scrawl is also a card that I'm going to put up in the toppest of tiers. Scrawl does a kind of similar thing to Vault in that it is a lot of cards that you get to see for only 1 cost, or upgraded at best of all 0 cost, giving you an entirely full hand of cards. The more cards you can get out of your hand, the better Scrawl becomes, and I particularly like it in conjunction with the starting miracle that Watcher has. You can play that miracle to make room in hand, and then you can draw even more cards with the Scrawl. It's dang good, and even very good with multiple copies as well. Lesson Learned. This might also end up in the highest of tier. These are definitely the 3 best rares on Watcher. Lesson Learned's not an always take for me, like the other 2 are. Where Lesson Learned is not good is when you have plenty of upgrades already. For example, you've got an Egg Relic that's giving you lots of upgrades, or if you have a very small deck of cards, which might be completely reasonable to do on the Watcher as well, then Lesson Learned is not great. That said, Lesson Learned is a way to accumulate tons of upgrades essentially for free in your Watcher run, as long as you can land the kill, which is not always a given. I think Lesson Learned is 1 tier below S for me. It is a fantastic, fantastic card. If you can get the kills with it, which does take a little bit of practice and a little bit of patience. Sometimes you have to trade a little bit of health for it too, but it's super worth it because Lesson Learned will quickly result in an entirely upgraded deck of cards and will enable your run to snowball quite powerfully. Problems with Lesson Learned include that it is a sort of delayed effect. It's a card you have to carry around for a while and land a few kills with before it really benefits your deck. And if you need immediate help, then it's not going to do that for you. It also competes with other cards that require you to kill foes like the Ritual Dagger or Hand of Greed, and that can be a bit of a problem too. Alright, just a few left. Let's talk Brilliance here. Brilliance does damage based on the amount of mantra you've gained. A little bit conditional. I find that oftentimes when I'm offered Brilliance, it's I don't have any mantra. And so Brilliance is only a deal 12 for 1, but deal 12 for 1 is still above the curve for most Watcher attacks. So even without any mantra, Brilliance is quite takeable. I particularly like Brilliance as a floor 1 or early act 1 take, if offered. But overall, I find that it's not as competitive with some of the other damage sources for Watcher, like Tantrum or like Wallop and Wheel Kick. Ragnarok, meanwhile. Ragnarok hits multiple times. It's a big expensive card. 5x5 normally, or 6x5 upgraded. Probably would say B tier for regular Ragnarok and A tier for upgraded Ragnarok. What I like about Ragnarok is that it's a good target for card duplication. It just does a lot of damage for one card. It'll block multiple times with Talk to the Hand. It'll scale multiple times with Strength. And you can very easily scale or buff Ragnarok to be hundreds of damage, ending combats instantly. Particularly with stuff like Omniscience. I think I'll leave it in B tier. It's good, but definitely not my favorite rare. It is one of my favorite rare attacks, though, and my favorite expensive card on the Watcher, probably. Gets double damaged with Necronomicon, which is particularly impactful. Ragnarok's very usable. Again, this is probably straddling the A tier line for me. Not quite as good as Lesson Learned. Judgment. For 1 cost, Judgment kills an enemy that has 30 or less health, or upgraded 40 or less health. I think this card is a little bit slept on. Even though it's a card that doesn't benefit from stances, what Judgment does is allow you to instantly and quickly kill one threatening opponent or finish a wounded opponent. Notably, Judgment instantly kills any Gremlin, Judgment instantly kills any Reptomancer dagger, and 30 or 40 health can easily be a finishing blow on any moderately threatening enemy like one Slaver or a Snake Plant or a Collector minion. Where Judgment is best is supporting decks that are slow and have a lot of trouble getting set up. So if you're trying to do lots of powers, like you're doing Establishment plus Battle Hymn, or trying to set up a Conjure Blade, or any other kind of main offensive strategy that takes multiple turns to get into play, then Judgment can be a really handy way to buy yourself some time for that to occur when there are threatening enemies on the field. Not always something that you'll need, and notably doesn't really do anything against big single targets, but its inclusion, I think, is worth it when it comes to how much it helps in the multi-enemy fights for decks that are a little behind the curve. If you can do lots of damage on turn 1, you're not going to need this card, but if you can't, Judgment's excellent. Wish. Wish is a card I've moved up and down in my rankings quite a bit. It used to be that I very, very highly ranked the ability of Wish to generate you money, but these days I tend to find that Wish is very expensive. 3 cost makes it quite difficult to actually put into play, and oftentimes the weight of carrying this card around makes it difficult to justify. That said, Wish is a card that's flexible, and flexibility is power. I think I'm going to put it actually in B here. The ability to gain Strength with Wish is extremely valuable for the Watcher, because Strength can be just tremendous amounts of damage for her. So 1 Wish can be your damage solution for Time Eater or for Heart, if you need to scale up, and you can be used to gain money along the way. I think most of the time you're better off without this card, though. It is a little unwieldy. A little bit better with a Miracle, because it's a bit easier to play. How about Alpha, Beta, Omega? I think Alpha, Beta, Omega is very hard to play. Probably down in C tier. Not useless like anything else, but definitely tough to make use of. Alpha creates a Beta, which is 2 cost, which creates an Omega, which is 3 cost, deal 50 damage to all enemies every turn. Problems with Alpha is that it's a lot of investment to get set up, and the other problem with Alpha is that it's not enough damage on its own. to solve the game. If you have an Alpha, Beta, Omega, and you want to take on the Heart, you still need another damage source. Either a second Omega, or you need to supplement that with attacks. Alpha, Beta, Omega also notably suffers from not being able to scale from Wrath or Divinity stance, like many other non-damage sources on the Watcher. Non-attack damage sources on the Watcher. Alright, and the last of the rares is Omniscience. Omniscience targets a card in the draw pile and plays it 2 times. It's a 4-cost card, which is pretty dang difficult to play. But if you can play Omniscience, I think it's really, really good. Particularly notable for being good in multiple copies. One Omniscience can target another Omniscience, and then for the price of 1 Omniscience, you're playing 2 cards in the draw pile multiple times. Or even more if you've got more Omnisciences. That makes Omniscience a really good target for card duplications. Omniscience is also fantastic with the Snecko Eye relic. But in general, Omniscience combined with any kind of scaling card can be an incredible inclusion. Omniscience Talk to the Hand to block forever against the Heart. Omniscience Mental Fortress to block forever against the Heart. You can Omniscience Wish for lots of money. Omniscience Devotion's one of my favorites to gain tons of mantra every turn. But in a pinch, it can also be a double play of a block card or an attack card to instantly end a fight. The whole idea behind Omniscience is that it's flexible, and that does make it a pretty valuable card for me. I really do like it a lot. All right, and lastly, I do want to include the starter cards here for the sake of completion, something that's been requested with the other tier lists. So I've got Eruption, Vigilance, Strike, and Defend here. Eruption, it's the starting Wrath card of Watcher. It upgrades to 1 cost, and honestly, it's dang good. Eruption is an A-tier card for me. A very rare removal. I usually only take out Eruption if I get an early Tantrum, and that's in lieu of upgrading it rather than anything else. Usually you don't need anything other than the Eruption that you're given. It's good stuff. Vigilance is also a very good card, notably upgrading to 12 block over 8. I think probably a B tier overall. It's not as good as Eruption, and although I'll notably almost never remove this card. Strikes are shockingly good on the Watcher. Not the worst card in the world. I'd put them in C tier. They are better than Defends, especially in the early game, as Watcher can multiply their damage for 12. Although strikes on other characters are miserable, strikes on the Watcher ain't too bad. Conversely, Defends are, I think, probably the worst card of the starter deck for Watcher, usually my initial removal, and definitely down in D tier there. They're just inefficient block in a way that's undesirable for this character. She'd much rather be playing strikes. All right, that is my ranking of all the cards on the Watcher. All right, everybody, until next time, thank you so much for watching. Toodaloo. Hey there. If you enjoyed that video, watch this one next. And before you go, join us on Twitch and watch live. I'm there 5 days a week playing Slay the Spire, answering questions, and chilling with the community. Click the link in the description to follow right now. Ta-ta for now.